And we're back. Welcome back to No Sympathy for Kings, a Rich Man's podcast. I am your host, Ian, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Jessica Frazier, and she is an educator. And today we're going to talk about bullying. Welcome, Jessica. How are you?
I'm great. How about yourself?
Very good, very well. So before we get started, tell me a little bit about yourself. You're originally from South Bend, Indiana, right?
That is correct. That's where I grew up before my mom moved me and my siblings to Las Cruces, New Mexico. I kind of grew up like in a rough era. Like my dad went to prison when I was 10. So I was raised by a single mother from there on. And I became extremely independent. We went to college, went to graduated high school, was the first person to graduate from high school, and my family was the first person to graduate from college. And once I realized that I was able to accomplish that, it allowed me to become a teacher and go back and basically pour into my community of people that look like me.
Okay. And you come from a pretty big family, right?
Yes, I have 8 brothers and 3 sisters.
Wow.
Big
What's that
family.
like growing up with that kind of household? That
Um,
size.
Honestly, it was fun. I grew up with mostly brothers actually, and because my siblings are different on my mom and dad's side, but it became my norm. Like being around a bunch of people was something that I was used to. It was fun. I wasn't one of those kids that needed a lot of attention from my parents, so it didn't bother me. I was more
Okay.
of like your Matilda kind of, but not in that
Mhm.
family dynamic, if that makes sense. But
Gotcha.
kind of
Okay.
grew up like curious and doing my own thing and kind of being like an independent thinker, independent person.
Gotcha. What inspired you to get into education?
Honestly, God. Like
Yeah.
I wanted to be a lawyer. That was my dream. Like I was going to law school, I was studying for it, and God was just like, no, like that's not what I have for you. And I was like, no, I'm going to law school. So I was just so headstrong on doing that until like I had one of those like Saul Paul moments and I decided, okay, I'm gonna be a teacher. This is what you want from me. And it was kind of crazy because that's what I've always dealt with was children. Like I was always, whether it was at church or I remember my very first job when I moved to New Mexico actually was working with children. So kind of became like this is what I felt like God was calling me to do, even though it was not the path that I was originally trying to go on.
Okay. And your interest in education, was there any specific area of education that piqued your interest?
I love math.
Okay.
I love math. Yes,
Mm.
definitely. Math and writing
Okay.
are my favorite two subjects. I Math to me is like a puzzle. I think it's fun. So when I became a teacher, I'm like, I'm gonna give y'all what I got, and like seeing my students, like even the kids that didn't think they could do it, like see them make honor roll, see them like think quickly and be able to do it, like it just enticed me more to like stay where I was and continue to pour my knowledge into them so that they can pass the baton on to the next generation as well.
You must be an exceptional critical thinker.
I am most definitely. Oh, my teacher partner, she used to tell me she's like, you analyze the ceiling to the floor. I'm like, hey, that's just how I do. That's
Yeah.
how math folks are.
Yeah. Yeah. Very analytical.
Hmm.
Okay.
Most definitely.
And what do you do today? Do you teach high school, college, middle school? What?
I'm actually a pre-kindergarten teacher. I
Oh,
teach
okay.
transitional kindergarten, so kids who were born like me with a late birthday that could not start kindergarten. I teach those kids, and so they're basically learning everything that kindergartners are learning right now because I am just that teacher that's like, you are going to be ready when you get to elementary school because I've seen so many kids in kindergarten, like socially, emotionally, they're just not ready. And because of that, they're missing out on a lot of learning. And it's not that they can't learn, is that they're emotionally not ready yet. They weren't prepared. And so I just want to make sure that my students are prepared, like academically, socially, and emotionally.
Okay. How long you been doing? Have you been doing that?
I've been teaching.
Um, Teaching and teaching pre-K.
I've been teaching for over 10 years, but pre-K, this is my very first year teaching pre-kindergarten.
Okay. And what were you teaching before? I'm just curious.
My last grade that I taught before this was fourth grade math.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Well, that's wonderful. We need all the we need teachers that care, and we need them in abundance. So
Yes.
it's wonderful to meet someone that has that passion. All right. So I was told you wanted to discuss bullying specifically today, and this comes in three topical tiers in terms of friendship, confidence, and mentorship.
Mhm.
So I'll let you, I guess, kick this off and talk to me about what about bullying you wanted to discuss, and we can delve deeper into like your relationship in it and go from there.
Um, just in my own experience, and even as a teacher, like bullying can be very detrimental on a child's or adult's mental health, right? Like it can tear at your self esteem. And I just want kids to know in my book where that spirit of bullying stems from, right? It can come from people who are raised in a toxic household, who may experience bullying at school, or who may have been just like left for dead, and they have to basically find their own way in life. And it may not have been the healthiest way. But my book is mainly to get people to understand, like, no matter what type of bullying you're experiencing, never allow it to diminish your self-worth, right? Like if you allow what somebody else put onto you dictate who you are, then that individual can control you as a human being. Like you have relinquished all control to a person. And children and even teenagers may not specifically know that because it's not being something that's really being taught in the home, right? Like most parents are not breaking down where this energy or spirit is coming from. Like they don't say, oh, this child may be being bullied at home or neglected, and they're basically taking what they're getting in their environment and they're bringing it here. And that goes back to just the juvenile detention system, right? Like you can put a kid in a system and they can go through a great process, but if you put them right back into that environment, you're not giving them a good place to start. Like they're going to go right back to where they come from. So if a kid is in a household where they're not being mentally and emotionally cared for, then you're going to see that in their behavior. And most teachers don't notice that. They don't notice that this child is not doing anything to you. Like this child may be angry, right? Can you sit with that child in their anger and help them deal with maybe the bullying that they're dealing with at home, or maybe the bullying they're dealing with at school? Like how can you deal with that without being judgmental, right? But I also want bullies to know, like, there's healing that needs to take place within your life for you to be a functional person in society. Like you need to be self-aware of yourself to be socially aware. And if you're not, you're going to continuously, it doesn't matter how much money you have, how many clothes you can buy, how many cars you have. If you are not, if you don't have the ability to love yourself, and recognize when you're in toxic situations, it can be detrimental. And we see that on TV all the time, how many teenagers are killing, their peers or themselves because bullying is not something that's highly dealt with in school. It's more of like, oh, just deal with it. It's brushed under the rug, or you're just suspending a kid without not really getting to the deep root of the issue.
So it's fair to say, just based off of your assessment, that more often than not, bullying, like the genesis of bullying, starts with dysfunctional home life for most
Yeah,
children.
yeah, and sometimes it can be just at school because a child can be raised in a healthy home life, but if they're at school, let's say you have like one of the things I saw a lot is kids who are extremely intelligent, right? Like they may not fit in with the regular crowd, and so they're ostracized and bullied because of it, and teachers don't stand up to it, right? Like they just let it go on. And so this kid no longer feels safe at school, but they isolate themselves because they don't really feel like people understand who they are, and teachers are not aware of the gifted people that they have within their midst. So they allow these kids to be picked on. So sometimes, yes, it does stem from a home life, but sometimes it comes from school. Like they could be
Hmm.
raised in a healthy home life and they just have, some kids are just mean. They come, like if you have mean parents, right? Like let's say you're a child that is raised in a household where a parent is mean, but you may not be necessarily being abused. You're going to take that spirit to school because that's what you see. Kids mimic their parents, whether or not they're aware of the behavioral traits. Like they look up to their parents. And so they may not even be aware, like, hey, you're toxic, right? Like this is not a healthy way to be around people socially. Like, you don't talk to people like that. You don't make people feel bad about their gifts, or maybe they may not be the hoodest person around, but they're extremely intelligent. They have Black people have those gifts. And so if you don't know how to handle that, people can mistreat that and can make people feel like they don't have any value.
Hmm. Now, I want to I want to talk a bit, like, I guess, about like the psych profile of your average bully. Like, I want to understand bullies because I
Mhm.
think that's really important. That's going to be really paramount to what we're discussing tonight. So, like, who are these people? Who are these children? I know we already established that more often than not, bullies are created or a product of dysfunctional home life. But can we delve a little deeper?
I mean, if I could profile a bully, I would be say it would be somebody that has severe insecurity issues, right? Because like I said, a person can walk out, you can meet a person that's a bully that can be dressed nice from head to toe, right? Like, you got the makeup on and you look nice, but deep down inside there's a lot of insecurities, and it can become from like what someone told you. Even a teacher can make a child feel less than who they are if they're not careful, right? And so if you're constantly being told certain things about yourself, you may start to believe them. So there's a great deal of insecurities there, and a person that walks in can come from a poor family, right? But they have this radiance of security about themselves, like they're confident, right, in themselves, whether it's in a sport, whether it's in their academics, whether it's in their looks, right? And I walk in, I could have had my mama could have died last night. You never know. But because I am so enriched in myself, I'm not gonna put that out on everybody. And I may still have confidence in myself, right? I can come from a poor family, but I still can radiate with confidence. And that can trigger somebody. Like, how dare you walk in here and be happy with yourself? Like, you are self-aware, you have dealt with that self-love. And yes, teenagers can be this way because some kids grow up very mature. And that's when you get around people that may not be on that level. Like, you can be 16, 17 years old walking in with your peers, and you may be highly intellectually intelligent, right? And but these kids may not feel like they are, or they've been given this image like, oh, speaking of Black people are not supposed to be intelligent. You walk in, you have this intelligence about yourself, this confidence, and they have all of these insecurities. They're gonna take out how they feel on you because they don't know how to deal with themselves and deal with the pain that they're dealing with. And if their parents are not helping them get help, like, what happens when you don't get help, right? It leads into worse problems. And I believe a bully is somebody that has deep rooted insecurities that needs to be rectified in order for them to be able to function in society. And that, a kid who may be bigger than their normal peers, if their peers are constantly telling them how big they are, you know what I mean? They eventually will start, and the teacher is not helping them deal with it, and the parents are not helping them deal with it. Like, you know what? Yes, sweetie, I know that you may be bigger than the rest of your peers, but you still are amazing, right? If you're not telling your child that, and they're going to school, and eventually, how many times can you keep poking that bear until they eventually they change their whole character to fit their environment to survive?
Yeah, that's fair. So when I hear like instances of bullying, I try to like humanize them a bit. So like when I think about a bully, I think obviously this is a person that probably has some some emotional issues in some cases, um, and also may lack, if anything, emotional intelligence, and that perception that a lot of us, are a lot of us develop as we mature, you know.
Right.
So I have my own, like, I was I guess bullied as a kid because I was larger, I was very tall and big and had big curly hair, and I was uh, mixed race, and so I'm just like, when you're the biggest person in school and you got all these smaller kids, black and white or whoever, some kids play rougher than others, especially,
Mhm.
at the time we grew up, I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, and, we played rough. Like, I remember the first time, a kid called me the N word. Like, I was like 6 years old. It was another black kid. And, I was crushed, it just, it really, that tapped my ribs a little bit. But oddly enough, like everybody who you know, I had those experiences with younger, like we're all like really good friends now as adults, you know. And when we have those conversations about and reminisce on those times, like a lot of the time they can't remember those instances, when they were being difficult. Like I remember
Mhm.
one guy and I, like he would literally just screw with me every day. Like I remember one time, I was just walking home and he ran and like speared me into the snow. Yeah, I've got stories for days about stuff like that. And and I grew up in a place called Cleveland Heights, which is a, suburb of Cleveland. And
Mhm.
I grew up during a time, it was a very culturally diverse space. So I grew up with like white kids, black kids, Middle Eastern kids, Asian kids, whatever. And I found as I was transitioning from, I think, elementary to middle school and then high school, we I was seeing more kids from the hood that were finding their way into the school system because uh, they, we lived like Superior Hill, which is shares a border with a place called East Cleveland, which is more like lower income down the way kind of environment. So I was noticing more kids like that. Again, air quotes, played rough and rougher as I grew, and
Right.
and I didn't really realize until I was an adult just how many of the people that I went to school with like were on drugs or just doing all sorts of wild stuff. Like I was that I because that just wasn't my life when I was a child.
Right. Right.
They were into that stuff. So it's interesting to reflect on that time. So I found that like a lot of those people, as they grow into adults, and they've grown into like fine adults, like really accomplished, family people, family men, and all of that. It's interesting to reflect on that, and and I say that again to tie it back into like humanizing the bully. I think those kids, and this is just in this instance, they were raised by parents that were probably raised by boomers. Um, and, that was like a tougher, I think, generation for parenting in general.
Right.
And they were a bit more curt and stern and maybe not so uh, sensitive as the younger generations are. Because I look at children today and like they're very in touch with their emotions, like extremely in touch with their emotions. Like our parents thought we were like soft or whatever. These kids like are really, really emotional creatures, and I I think part of it is a positive. It's a net positive that children are a bit more emotionally intelligent, more in touch with their emotions. But I do believe that we have to help them develop like the mental toughness,
Mhm.
and still be like while still being emotionally intelligent. So this is just like my theory. I think like the only way to combat, I think, bullying and the products of bullying, like of course we have the extreme examples, like what we see in the news, over the last couple of decades, with the school violence and everything. Really figuring out uh, who these children are and what is inspiring or triggering those behaviors will go a long way toward us mitigating this. But
Exactly.
yeah.
I mean, as a teacher, I remember I had a kid in my class and he was a pretty like stalky kid, very like hard on the outside, and he was a bully. And but the thing was with him that when you go back to emotional intelligence, like that's my superpower, right? Like I am able to look into one of my students' face and know something is wrong, even if you're not showing it, right? And so this kid, I remember his mom just saying like he was a lot like his dad. And so like one way that I got him to kind of like be more aware was like I talked to him in his language. Like I would get on his level, like in a way to tell him like, like they kids always like, oh, you real, you no cap, you fake. Like I would tell him, I'm like, if you're not careful of like what's bothering you, like that's gonna get into your heart, right? That's gonna become who you are and it's going to spread out. You know what I mean? And so like because I had built that relationship with him and he understood, like what I was saying, because for me to get my students to listen to me, there has to be a trust. right? And oftentimes, a lot of times, a lot of kids are coming from parents who have not healed from their own trauma, and it becomes generational curses where we're constantly passing on things that are not just healthy, like for us to be passing on. Or a lot of times, parents are not talking to their kids about it because I grew up being bullied, like from family members to people. Majority of my bullying actually came from family members. You know what I mean? And it's not until I got older and I realized just, and not to be boastful, but just how intelligent I am. And that makes people afraid. I'm not only an intelligent person, but I cannot be manipulated and controlled. And so when I think of bullies, I think of someone that needs healing, like just flat out, period. Like that's some, but I also think that people need to be aware of their social surroundings. Like if you're around people, because like you'll have somebody who may befriend somebody, and like the whole time they're like verbally abusive to them, and they think that that's a friendship. But it's like, are you experiencing that at home for you to think that that's normal? Because a person that's been raised healthy and they're more aware, they may deal with it for a period of time, but at some point you're going to be like, hey, like I need to set some boundaries with
Mm-hmm.
you. You know what I mean? Like I can still be empathetic for you, but I'm still not going to be your punching bag, at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. And I feel like as educational systems, we can be more helpful with helping parents find healing for their children. You know what I mean? Like, is my school a safe place for both the bully and the child that's being bullied? Because
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes you can probably say, no, it's not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if a child feels like they fit in at school and they safe, you're not gonna have time for all that. Well, you maybe have some times where you may get into a fight or things may arise, of course, but ultimately when you are in a safe place, if you can give me some of the most hardest kids in the school that are not only the hardest kids but have special needs, and I can help them change their life around, then we're failing them as a system.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers are failing them. You know what I mean? Like a lot of us are here just for paychecks. Like you can impact kids' lives whether they're a bully or they're not a bully. That's only if you have emotional intelligence and you're willing to be aware of the children you are around. And often,
Mm-hmm.
more than times not, teachers are not. Either
Yeah.
one, they're worried about whatever they have going on at home, which is understandable, right? Or like what I've seen as a teacher, everybody clicked up, just doing their own little thing. And I'm like, I'm here for the kids. I'm not here for anybody else but them. Like I would love to have healthy relationships with my colleagues, but at the end of the day, like my number one goal is to be a impactful teacher. And you're gonna find a handful of those in a school.
Yeah.
And so many kids are like crying out for help. You're seeing it. If a kid tell me that they're being bullied, I take that very seriously and I act immediately. Like there's no like, oh, just get over it, or I'm just gonna talk. No, we need to have a deep conversation because I don't want this kid coming to school feeling like they're not safe.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
I don't want to come to work feeling like that.
Yeah. I was actually, you sort of touched on one of my questions. Do schools and parents really care enough about this today? Like,
In my professional opinion, the schools that I have, because I've worked for like several schools, both big and small, no. The only parents that really truly care about it are the parents who kids are being bullied, right? Everybody else is just like lollygagging, like it's more like a slap on the wrist. And I even had to like talk to my boss. I'm like, and you need to realize that females bully boys, and we need to talk about that too. Because I had a group of boys come to me, it was like, Miss Frazier, like, why is it okay for girls to hit boys, but boys not hit girls? And I'm like, I don't think it's good for either one. Like, I don't, and like, I know your dad's telling you, no, you don't put your hands on somebody. That's domestic abuse. Eventually when you get older, now you got grown women beating up on men and vice versa. Like, that's what I mean by when it's not dealt with,
yeah,
how
that's
to that.
that is dangerous too. For one word, escalation. It always escalates. Like I've been
Okay.
in those situations where, women have put hands on me, and it's like it just
Mhm.
always escalates.
Yeah, like keep your hands to yourself. Number
Like,
one.
yes, yeah, yeah, and if you're a man, like if you're a man, like a real man, like all you can do is remove yourself from the situation as best you can, and
Right.
that's
But even then you're human. You know what I mean? Like I'm not someone's punching bag.
it's
Like,
hard. It's hard. Like, yeah, like
no.
I just want to leave. Um, okay, so as we're talking about problems, I think we've like encapsulated, like what the issue is. As far as bullying, we've seen enough products of bullying. I think we have a rough idea of like what uh, why bullying exists, because ultimately there's a sect of children that are just not terribly emotionally intelligent and may not be getting quite you know maybe the most nurturing home life.
Right.
And and again, and I do think that there are just some kids that just play rough and they don't think anything of it really.
Right. Hmm.
um, so I want to talk about solutions now, too, as we're talking about the problem. So have you considered like proposing that like a course be taught on bullying or anything like that, or even like a lunch and learn kind of deal?
I haven't proposed anything like that in nature, but I think that would be a great idea. I think having a course on bullying and breaking down the emotional intelligence and the psychological development that comes with it, and like getting bullies to look at themselves within themselves, like to do the work, I feel like it would be very helpful because, I don't want to shame bullies, but at the same time, I'm like, there has to be something that needs to be done. And I think a course would be really good. And I think also even having bullies at some point as they overcome this hurt and pain, they tell their story, right? Like, this is the healing that I went through. Because I feel like it's no different than a person, and I don't want to compare it to this, but like it's no different than a person that has an addiction, right? Like there is an issue with what you're doing. And I feel like bullying is so prevalent now. Like it's something that has been normalized and people look at it as if it's like something that's normal. Like it's okay. Like just get over it. Like be stronger. And it's like, no, nobody should have to feel unsafe.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And I think the people that are doing it, they need to be aware of that. This is why you're doing it. And I think
yeah,
a lot of times those bullies are neglected emotionally themselves. Because if you
sure,
have parents who are investing into their children emotionally, not just materialistically, then those kids will come out healthy. Like, yeah, they're going to make mistakes and things like that, but they're not going to be seeking blood. You know what I mean? Like a
right,
kid come to school, or maybe they're too thin and too little. You know what I mean? And so, like, they're being targeted. And
yeah,
so, I think that would be a great way
yeah.
to get out
Well,
there.
bullying is normal. And when I say normal, I mean it's not an oddity. Amongst humanity, it's been going on as far as throughout the history of humanity. There's always been like a person or persons that imposed or inflicted something on others. For whatever reason, whether it's for personal gain or just because it makes them feel better about themselves, or just because. So I say that to say that when we're combating bullying, we have to understand that like it's not an oddity and it's nothing necessarily new. So it's we're almost combating human nature in a way, in a real funky way. So
when when I
that's
say when I say normal, I mean like it's not something that people should be doing. Like waking up and going to work is normal, right? Eating, drinking is normal. Like bullying has become normalized because nobody is willing to address the
yeah,
issue, but
or
it
maybe
shouldn't
not
be.
normal. Maybe normal is not the right word. Maybe commonplace.
There
Maybe
you go. Yeah.
yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's
It's more commonplace.
yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think that would be like a good start. Like, do you have PTA where you work?
No, we do not. But I am very, very like hands-on with my parents because I work in a smaller setting. Like I see my parents every single day. And so I talk about these things with them because like not that bullying is so much prevalent in my pre-K classroom, but I see it like snipping in, right? Because kids are kids and things like
Mhm.
that. And they pick up on what adults do, even if adults don't notice it. Like they pick up on what you do and how you treat people. They're gonna pick
Yeah.
up on
Hmm.
but I feel like that is something that needs to be in school, but it needs to be intentional because a lot of schools do have stuff like this, but it's just to check it off their list. Like when you're running a school, whether it's a district or a community based, like there's so many stipulations, so many requirements, so many things that they put on your plate that you have to do where you're like, just get it done, right? Like I
Hmm.
have other bigger fish to fry, even though bullying is actually going to make your school probably more healthier. But there may be PTAs, but it's not as effective as it should be. With
Hmm.
because I envision a school where parents are there, right? Like that's
Mhm.
what, if I was to have a school, because I want kids to see their parents, and I like when your mama at that school, yeah, you're gonna get your life together, right? Like when you
Mhm.
know that your neighbor is your teacher assistant and she know your mama and daddy and she gonna let them know you was cutting up at school, you're gonna make better decisions, right? And so PTAs are essential, but if they're not implemented strategically, then it's not really going to help bullying if that's not the target goal.
Yeah, well, I asked that because like in order to like put together anything tangible in my mind, like you're gonna need buy-in not only from the parents, but also the administration.
Mm-hmm.
The BOE or whatever. And I do think that peppering this into early child development is probably like the if you're trying to do something in a macro way, it's probably going to be the most effective to teach those behaviors. Because I'm more of the opinion that bullies need guidance as opposed to healing. Because again, like there are kids that generally have like those that emotional deficiency, if you will. But I think that they just need guidance to know that this is like the proper way to behave. Now, and it takes me back to my childhood. So I went to elementary school that was big on like the number one buzzword that I heard from kindergarten to fifth grade was peace. And we had a mantra at my elementary school, and it was peace, love, respect for all. And
Mm-hmm.
we had like all of our student body assemblies. We started with like that mantra, peace, love, respect for all. And we made sure that we incentivized peacemaking
Mm-hmm.
amongst the student body. So like we had like monthly peacemakers awards. The kid would get like a nice medal and everything, and and teachers would keep a lookout for like peacemaking like behaviors. We had what we call peer mediators, where we had designated kids of each grade in each class that were exceptional at moderating conversation and
Right.
engagement between their peers. And ultimately, they were there to kind of like squash whatever the issue is. My earliest memory of hearing the word mediator, nowadays, I think mediator, I think more of a business perspective. But when I was a child, I first heard it in the context of a peer mediator. So I think that this is the kind of like, these are the seeds you want to sow. And this is the kind of like bare bones of the infrastructure that you probably want to put up if you want to implement something like that. That would be like my suggestion, as
Right.
just a takeaway from this conversation, and
Yeah.
for all of you educators that are watching this as well that have like similar concerns with where you teach,
Right.
I would say definitely try that. I mean, I found it to be very, in retrospect, very effective, and even for us kids that played really rough,
Right.
it was a good way to kind of like mitigate
Right.
that and let them know that even if they don't necessarily you don't necessarily have buy-in with the children necessarily, like they may not believe it, but at least they know like, okay, this is the optimal way to keep me out of trouble, you
Mm-hmm.
know with teachers and ultimately the parents, because like we live in a very everything we have here in America is based off of a system of deterrence, all the way down to law enforcement, right? So, if you commit a crime, there is a punishment, of some sort, whether it's a fine or incarceration or community service or whatever. If you
Mm-hmm.
misbehave in school, there is a consequence. There is
Right.
detention. There is again community service. There is cleaning the chalkboard. Even though chalkboards aren't really a thing anymore, as far as I know, I think it's more of a washboard kind of society we're in now. But you get the idea. So
Mm-hmm.
again, and that's very basic developmental stuff. Cause and effect, actions and consequence.
Right.
So
I mean, I definitely see where you're getting at. I think that would be a great idea. But I'm gonna circle back. I think that depending on the type of bully, there needs to be some type of healing, right? Because healing and guidance to me are like a math equation. 1 + 1 = 2, right? Healing plus guidance equals retribution. Like you're turning your life around because oftentimes some bullies may just need guidance, right? Like you're just misbehaving and I need to show you the proper way. And then there are kids who have been like emotionally damaged and tore down to where it's like, we need to sit here and stifle through these feelings, right? Like I have a 4-year-old in my class now who's going through like his goal is more like behavioral. And like I notice every time his therapist brings up, like he has two therapists. One is speech, and then there's another one where it's dealing with like emotions. And whenever she starts talking about certain emotions, he shuts down. Like he doesn't want to talk about it. He feels uncomfortable. But like with this other therapist, like he goes along like it. And I told his therapist, I was like, you know what? Using my emotional intelligent hat, and being around this kid, you know, because when they brought him to me, like they just didn't think that he was able to like function in a classroom. And I'm like, yeah, he doesn't like the way he's in my classroom, like his parents and my executive director are like, who is this kid in your classroom? But it's like most people need to heal. Like you need healing. And not just bullies, but just people in general, right? Like too many people are not okay with dealing with their emotions. Like they just put things under the rug. And I'm talking from experience, right? Like some bullies need guidance. Like you just need to be redirected because you just out here doing stuff that you know you're bored, right? Like you need to sit down and stand up. Like let's sit down and learn this, and then I'm gonna show you how to get it. And then there's kids who have just been tore down so much. Like think about a victim of bullying, right? Like they need healing. And so because whatever that bully dumped on them is now in them. So they're dealing with whatever that bully just dumped on them, plus whatever they're going through in their own life. Right. And so, like, if you're not healing and you're not being guided, you can guide somebody. But if you're not teaching a kid how to self regulate their emotions and deal with uncomfortable feelings and pain, that guidance is going to circle them back around because you can put a kid in my class and then they'll be like, this kid did good in your class. But then they went on and then now they're right back to that same behavior because there was no healing that took place. Right. Like, even in my class, I had so many kids, maybe like they trusted me and I was able to help guide them like within my classroom. But as soon as they left out my classroom, they was right back to square one because nobody helped them heal. You're not going to go back on a football field if your arm is broke because it didn't heal right. Like if that arm didn't heal, you're not going to play. And so like guidance, I do agree with you on that, but I'm going to have to say like if they're not being healed, that guidance is going to go right out the door because they don't know how to self-contain themselves. They're depending on somebody else constantly to tell them what to do, and they haven't learned that this is why you're acting like this. Like you need to cry. Like I would have kids that would just sit in my chair, boys included, and all I would say was like, "What's wrong? Why are you so angry?" And boom, tears. Just I mean, crying. So there's healing that needs to take place. Most definitely. Most
Sure.
definitely.
Sure, I agree. The only asterisk I would add to that is that we do have to remember that we are dealing with children,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a very raw emotional state. You know, like it takes so much time and patience and development and just like living really to like really get to a place of like I guess what I would call like emotional balance or tranquility.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I'm 36, and I've only just recently really got, you know, I think over the last few years really got a really good hold on like my emotional state, and that's like a lot of you know talk therapy, yoga, you know the making sure I schedule self care and make sure it's baked into my week. You know, exercise, all you know all that stuff. Like it's about finding the right you know
Right.
combination that gels not only with like your schedule but your body chemistry and all that because we're all very complicated beings. You know, the only reason I push back again with like the healing idea, and I don't disagree necessarily, but again the asterisk I will put there is that these are young children and they have very raw emotional state, and we as a society again like it just sometimes it feels like we're quick to diagnose things when really we just need to figure out exactly what the ill is, you know, quote unquote, what the issue is, and again, offer proper guidance for the kids so they know how to manage not only their emotions, but how they interact with their peers and
Right.
adults and the rest of the world. And it is a sick, strange, scary world we live in today.
Right.
You know, like we can't trust anybody. The
Mhm.
idea of community, especially amongst us Black folks, is non-existent. Um,
Mhm.
our the villages, it's relatively non-existent. It's a scary place. Again, it takes time to like build up all that, and a lot of people don't even have that germ of the idea to even build like their own communities as they get older because of what's being nurtured. The idea of self and
Right,
trusting no one. Um, you know,
right,
it's baked into the music. Like the idea of self,
right,
or I don't need anybody. I don't need a man. I don't need a woman. I don't need parents. I don't need anything or anybody. You know,
right.
and that's part of what we need to get away from, and we as this generation of elder millennials need to get our arms around, because
Mhm.
you know I you know I believe that though a lot of people I know do complain about the behavior of children today. I always hold up the mirror and say, like, well, we were the generation ahead of them. What did we give them?
Exactly.
And the millennial generation is a very complicated generation, because like it's either it goes in either direction. You're either very measured because we have so much experience, because we were old enough to remember life before the internet. um, but there's also like a delayed maturity amongst this generation as well, because I think, I don't have any statistics in front of me, but I'm positive we really took the bronze ring for young parentage or youthful parentage over the last, I'll say, three decades. And you have immature young parents raising children, and they don't have not only the experience but the tools they need to
Exactly.
offer that guidance. And now, because we don't have that guidance, now we need healing. We're in a position where we need the healing. So, like,
Exactly.
to your point, yeah, I do think they're opposite sides of the same coin. They go hand in hand, and we have to hold ourselves accountable for it too. All of
Yeah.
us who are parents. Like, I have two children myself, and it's something I think about frequently. Is just
Right.
how is what am I'm doing, affecting them long term. And my wife and I are very mindful of that, like with all the way down to how we communicate with one another, especially in their presence. So
Right.
they only see us saying, we love each other, we love y'all, and it's very affirmative language and mannerisms, but that still has to be moderated.
Right. Yeah, and I also think too, like not everybody is meant to work with children, right? Like when you're working with children, like you have to be able to understand where a child is coming from and you have to be delicate with your approach. You know what I mean? I don't think that everybody has that capacity to do that. And I think that's why it's important to make sure we have the right kind of people around our children. Because as I said before, for me to be able to help a child heal, I have to be able to think back to what made me hurt. Like it may not be the same pain, but a lot of people don't have empathy. You know what I mean? And I noticed a lot of kids in the school, and I remember several teachers at the time I was there, like, some of our kids do not have empathy. They don't. You know, you're bullying a kid, but you don't know, maybe they're hurting, you know? And so if you don't have what it takes to work with a child, and you have teachers to this day, I feel like don't need to be a teacher, right? Like you don't have that capacity as a adult, and that's not to be judgmental, to work with children that come from what they call in the education high needs areas. That's what they call it, which is basically black and brown children who are in the ghetto. But you don't know their struggle. Like my dad went to prison. I didn't see my dad till I was 25. My mom was a single mom. We hopped from house to house. Like I was in the juvenile detention center. Like I can do this work. That's why I'm so impactful in what I do, and why you can give me the hardest kid, whether a female or a male. But I realized too, even just talking to you now, like I was guiding some of my kids, and I realized once they left my class, they went right back to the same behavior versus the kid that I help heal, where they're like, I'm like, hey, how is this kid doing? Because I don't see them anymore. Oh, this kid went from not being able to pass school to now passing standardized tests because I helped that kid heal. through their process of, remember, their dad was not there, they came back into their life, now he's dead. And so if you don't have that capacity to work with children, or you can't use empathy without having to go through something, those kids are not going to learn from you. And everybody know, that famous video, a child does not learn from somebody they don't like. It doesn't matter if it's academic, sports, or social and emotional learning. That's why
Mm-hmm.
that has now been adopted into schools. But like I said, as a teacher, you have so many things on your plate that it's overwhelming. But I know for me, like, my goal as a teacher is to help kids heal, learn, and develop. And because they trust me, they learn from me. And I don't take that for granted. I just don't. And parents
Mm-hmm.
need healing too, right? Like, I can't oftentimes reach a kid if I can't reach a parent. And my hat now is not to judge parents, right? Because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. And if you're not getting healing yourself, you can't help somebody else heal. And most
Mm-hmm.
people are not called to do that, because you would have to look yourself in the mirror first before you can
Mm-hmm.
help somebody else heal. And a lot of us aren't there yet. It's hard.
It's wild, like becoming an adult. Like I just said this recently. Like I grew up listening to like gangster rap and hip hop and everything, and like it's not in rotation as heavy as it used to be. Now that I've like I consume it differently. Like
Mhm.
there's still music that like I still love. Like I could still listen to the Doggy Style album and have a good time, but it's like it's with the different set of ears now too.
Right.
Like wait, did they just say? There's just so many things that like were said then that just like are just like not okay today. A lot of people that said those things then probably wouldn't say those things today. Probably wouldn't rap those same things today. Like even down to like KRS-One. Like you back in the day was rapping about getting with like underage girls and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Like yeah, it really happened. Yeah. I say that to say that I don't want us to like just continue, to wag our finger at the bullies. I do want to like again take it back to like how do we navigate and squash this at its inception. So with that said, like let's talk a little bit about like parents of bullies. Now, if you're a parent of a bully, I reckon there's probably a few different archetypes of a parent of a bully. Like there's like the quintessential, just parent that's just like rough and tumble, not quite as like in touch with their emotions, and they pass it along to their children in their approach to their parenting because that's how they were raised. Like the generational stuff is insane. Like there are things I'm learning about my old man. Um, that I didn't understand 20 years ago that are just so clear to me today, like why these things are the way, why his decision making process was what it was, and then hearing more about how my grandfather was back in the day, like he did all the same things. So it's like, it's interesting. So if you're a parent of a bully, like what are some of the things, like if you're inclined to even look at these things, like what are some things that a parent of a bully should look out for in their own children to make sure that they're not going to school and terrorizing another child?
I would have to say a lot, like, what kind of friends do they have? Right? Like, that
Mm,
is a huge factor in like what kids do in school. Cause you can take a kid like me who was in a school where like all my friends were skipping and doing all of that. And I was doing that, to putting me in a school where all my friends were like, we graduated, we going to college, and put me back on that track. So we're looking at friends. Like, that's a huge indicator of like what your child is more than likely doing. And most parents can, if your parent is available, they'll be like, that person ain't your friend, or I don't like this kid, because they see certain things that are not healthy, right? That could be detrimental, especially if you have a child that's big on following. Like, kids are
mm,
gonna follow, but if you're not a leader within, you be like, you know what, there's certain things that I'm not gonna do because my mom and daddy, I know better, right? Where
mm,
a child whose parent is less involved in their life, they're more wandering the streets. They're out doing things that they're not supposed to be doing at their age because they're raising themselves. So as a parent from a bully, it's more so like I said, they can come from a healthy home. I'm gonna look at my child's friends. That's a huge indicator of what you're doing.
hmm Yeah, and I would go deeper again there with the social circles piece. Again, that sense of community is very important. So me as a parent, if my child is around a child that I'm not really feeling their ways or their behavior, like I would probably be inclined to like get to know that parent a bit because children by nature are very rebellious. So if you tell them to stay
Mhm.
away from somebody, that's probably going to embolden them to spend time with them. And really,
Mhm.
there's not much you can do to really quell or stop that if they're going to school together and they're in class together. They're going to
Right.
interact at some point. You can control, whether that kid is in your house playing with your kid or whatever. But when they're at school, which they spend, what, probably at least 60 or 70% of their week there, if not more, if you don't have like aftercare or intramurals or whatever, then you're naturally, those children are still going to have those influence, and they're going to be influencing one another. So again, I do think it ties back into the communal piece, and if PTA or the idea of it has died off over the years, which I kind of get the feeling that it kind of has, like that's something I think we collectively, as parents, as teachers, as administrators, as governing bodies, should revisit, because it's very clear that a lot of the children are lost and they're just kind of being passed along and
Mhm.
cranked out. It's more or less an educational penal system in so many
You
ways.
right on that. That's how
Yeah.
you call it. That's a perfect phrase for that.
Oh yeah, it's ghetto here on Earth. Real ghetto. It's real ghetto.
Most definitely.
Hmm.
Most definitely.
Cool. Well, I think we covered a lot of great ground here. This is a fantastic conversation. Before we wrap things up, can tell the people where they can find you if they want more information.
You can find me on Facebook. I'm not a big social media person, like I am on there. But you can find me at Jessica Frazier on Facebook, or I also have like a little small Instagram called Writer's Breakfast. I post inspirational quotes and scriptures on there. So you can find me there, or on Twitter
Hmm.
at genuine underscore gifted. I post stuff on there too. So,
Okay.
but yeah.
And what's next for you? Like, where do you want to take this conversation?
Honestly, if I can be forthcoming wherever God leads me to, because I can, try to go where I want to go, but my goal is really to help children who are hurting and who have been bullied or are a bully, just find that healing and growth and guidance that they need, and also be there for parents, right? Because sometimes parents need help too. And so I've always been blessed to have great relationships with my parents, with every grade I've taught, and I don't take that for granted. And so me being able to have that with parents actually helps me be a successful teacher. So teach
Hmm.
teachers how to be present with their students emotionally. Like, I know we say it's not our job, but if you're working in education, you have to understand child development, right? So
Hmm.
I just want to give a voice to the voiceless, basically, in so many words, and be that person that's going to advocate for them no matter what.
Yep. I think you should take those relationships with those parents and those administrators and enhance it and build. So if you take nothing from this conversation, like in terms of like taking thoughts and manifesting them and making them, a real boy, quote unquote, like I think that's a good place to start. You know, call a meeting.
Most
Call a
definitely.
meeting. Give see if they'll give you 40 minutes. Offer them coffee and donuts and sit down and share your concerns and offer some of these different ideas. Like, you know, I think any school system, if there's no cost associated with it or low cost associated with it, like they should be open to exploring it, especially now with like all the other poison that's being pumped into the curriculum these days. Like, anti-bullying should be like a no-brainer, you would think. So,
Exactly.
fantastic conversation with Jessica. Uh, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel at No Sympathy for Kings, a Rich Man's Podcast. And be sure to follow me on the social medias out there: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I'm everywhere. If you prefer to listen to the audio version of this podcast, I am also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So look out for me. And be sure to like this video too. Really appreciate that. And as always, my good people, a lack of discipline may cost you your kingdom. No sympathy for kings. Peace.